Michael, welcome to Free Your Voice.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, let me see. So I have been working in the field of artificial intelligence for a long time, a little over 20 years now. Started out as a really passionate interest in languages and linguistics. And so actually my first job out of college was for a language technology company, the first one in Scandinavia. And working there on speech transcription, natural language processing, which as it turns out, ended up being really a core pillar of modern AI. So it's been interesting to follow over these past couple of decades.
Now, I remember one of the first computers that I had owned. I had bought this software that allowed me to dictate.
Yes.
And that it would translate it. And it wasn't always accurate. So is that the kind of stuff that you were involved with in the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, not very at the beginning. In the early days of what I was working on AI and speech transcription, speech recognition, it was sort of very limited, very constrained. You had to really want it to work. If you were hesitating or not articulating well, then it would just fail. Those sort of command and control style scenarios. Whereas today, the technology has advanced so much that you can have sort of really spontaneous discussions with multiple people, and you get very reliable transcriptions from that. So what you mentioned on transcription and translation has come in much later. I have worked on that a little over a decade ago at Microsoft. We had a project, this was with Skype, supporting cross-language conversations over Skype. So it first does speech recognition, going from speech to text. And then you have the text, and then you translate that to a different language. And then you hand it over to a third piece of technology called speech synthesis that creates a voice out of that translated text. And it's all imperfect technologies, and as you go step by step, the errors you see in the process are compounded. So that has been a very interesting challenge, how to counter for that. And so we're able to model all of that jointly, so you don't necessarily build on previous errors, but you're able to counter those if you can anticipate what kind of errors you might see.
To our audience who only knows AI through ChatGPT,
which is a lot of people.
What is artificial intelligence?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it has several different definitions. There is no one true definition of it. I consider it as a suite of technologies that simulate human capabilities. So things like cognitive capabilities specifically. So things like reading, like hearing, seeing, and speaking as well. And you're absolutely right. Over this past year and a bit since ChatGPT came out, it has sort of really taken the world by storm. And it has really changed the landscape a lot. And it has opened up to many, many more people who have sort of started to notice AI for the first time, even though AI has been around for a long time. But I think one of the things that ChatGPT did very well is the interface. So there's a lot to be said for the capabilities of these large language models of modern generative AI. But actually just putting all of that behind this very intuitive interface of a simple chatbot or chat interface. Doesn't require any instructions. You just go right ahead and start to use it and play with it and explore. So I think a lot of people, as part of that, not only discovered AI sort of as something that they can relate to and use, but also sort of see how that can play a role in their day-to-day lives from a personal point of view, but also from a professional point of view, sort of how AI can assist them in tasks in what they do at work and as well as outside.
So all these questions that people ask of ChatGPT, how's it being processed? Who's processing it? Whose computing power is it being processed by? And then what happens to that data?
Yeah, all good questions. And one of the questions that I often hear in my work at Microsoft Philanthropies is around some of the concerns around modern AI. And some of the concerns that come up most frequently, that's around data protection, data security. There's also things like jobs displacement and things like these generative capabilities are really capable of generating new content that feels very authoritative, sounds confidently human, but may very well be incorrect. So the potential to generate misinformation or even disinformation like that's intended, it's a powerful tool for that as well. So it's important to sort of really counter the potential for misuse with some sort of core principles around getting the most out of the AI capabilities.
So how do we define then principles in a world where morals and ethics swing in the wind?
Yeah.
Whose good is it? Whose bad is it? How do you define it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And then obviously it's not one person or one entity that can define that. It's something we need to do together as a community, as a society. And it'll by necessity be an ongoing discussion. You come up with some design principles, some guidelines, including some regulation, but that will continually need to be updated as we learn more, as we see more opportunities and challenges, and as we have more and more people sort of engage in that conversation. So one thing we launched or released about 7 years ago at Microsoft was the Responsible AI Design Principles, which aim at sort of capturing some of the main guidelines and ways to use AI, develop AI in a responsible manner that sets up conditions for best outcomes for the humans using it, as well as those that may be impacted by it. And so there are things like transparency and accountability, making sure that it's used with fairness in the design, that data security and data privacy are considered. And so we have been using these responsible AI design principles internally. We have converted those principles into engineering processes. We have a standard. We're now on sort of V2 of that standard. And we're using those internally in our engineering processes. So taking the sort of core tenets of AI and ethical use of AI and responsible use of AI and sort of converting those into engineering processes. It's not an easy process, but it's been important for us to do that. So we use it internally. We also encourage its use externally. It's encouraging to see many other stakeholders and players in the tech industry working on similar kind of guidelines and design principles. And you can see more and more activity and discussions in the regulatory space as well. The European Union's AI Act came out recently. There's ongoing discussions here in DC as well around US regulation. And it's a really is an important piece of the puzzle. If you see the bureaucracy process kind of by design moves slowly, and I think that's a good idea, so that it doesn't move too fast in any one direction, but technology moves fast, and AI even more so moves incredibly fast. And so regulation will by necessity be running behind the AI advancements. But we do still need that.
But how advanced is it? I mean, I remember one of my favorite movies when I was much younger, now I'm a 40-year-old man, it was Terminator.
Yep.
Where Skynet was everywhere. Artificial intelligence, can we prevent that from happening when it starts to learn? Or are we there right now?
Yeah, so there are several aspects to that. One is AI doesn't have any intent, doesn't have any meaning. AI is capable of executing much more efficiently on the task that we as humans give it. So I think there are critical parts of awareness around what AI can do and cannot do. A lot of what I do in my day job is working with nonprofits, humanitarian organizations around the world on sort of trying to connect the dots between their challenges, their opportunities, and see how AI may or may not play a role in helping them scale up their mission. And so part of that is sort of to tease out reality from Hollywood. For most people, maybe with the exception of this past year, but for most people, the exposure to AI has come through Hollywood. And so it's important to make it real, to make people understand how AI works and how it makes decisions, and thereby how it makes mistakes, so that you can sort of understand if we're implementing an AI-based solution into this ecosystem. Let's say it's for, let's say, refugee resettlement or something like that. What are ways, and we come back to these responsible AI design principles, what are ways that we can optimize the best use of the technology to sort of really supercharge the mission and the desired outcomes, but then also be very much aware of ways that AI can fail. So understanding how it makes decisions, how it makes mistakes, and then integrate mitigations, integrate in the design ways to counter potential errors in the AI, because any AI system will absolutely make errors.
So then what version would you say we are today in AI, knowing that there were other versions that came before what we see today? I mean, where are we in terms of what level, what step, what chapter?
And I've had the pleasure and the honor of seeing a lot of breakthroughs in the area of AI upfront, including about 10 years ago when we moved to deep learning models. That was a massive improvement in overall quality and accuracy of AI capabilities. So much so that we have now reached human parity in a number of different domains, like speech recognition, language understanding, machine translation. Human parity meaning the AI-based system can perform the task it's been given to the same level as the corresponding human experts would be able to do.
But isn't that in itself a bit of a con? I mean, for instance, recently a startup approached me to show me their technology, and it was that you could input your business plan, and it would create, it would finalize your plan for you by allowing you to add researchers or other team members that were AI bots. And you could watch them have these conversations in the chat box to ultimately come back at the end and say, here's what we agreed after 78 meetings. We've come to determine this is the right path forward. Well, by implementing this, it does strip away jobs in the process, right?
So it certainly can strip away some jobs, and there's clear impact on the labor market from AI. But it's not really anything new in the sense that automation and other types of technologies have replaced some tasks and even some roles in the past. The difference now is that with AI, that process happens at a significantly larger scale and pace. So yes, it's definitely going to have impact on the job market, both positive and negative. It's going to automate some tasks. I think in more cases, it's a question of automating individual tasks of individual jobs rather than replacing jobs altogether, though that will happen and is happening. At the same time, new jobs are getting created as part of this. There's a job role that is getting quite popular now with large language models and generative AI called a prompt engineer or a prompt designer. That's a role that didn't exist a year ago. But we do have to be cognizant of the fact that, yes, many people's jobs will be impacted. And so in order for people to, let's say, stay relevant or stay up to date on what is needed in the future job market, it is absolutely critical that there is easy and affordable access to training opportunities, to upskilling opportunities, so that as the tasks change, as parts of your job gets automated, that you are able to use these new tools. And So there is the training part, making that affordable and accessible, but then there is also focusing on a wide range of tools, no-code tools that allow people who are not as technically savvy or who are not, say data scientists or data engineers, that they can still use these tools without having to write code, for example. And that's one of the things we see now with things like GPT models, that they're very easy to engage with. It takes some exploration. It takes sort of trying out what works, what doesn't. But it really removes the obstacles or reduces the sort of barrier to entry to actually start to interact and see benefit from these generative AI models. So yes, absolutely changes to the job market. Automation of some tasks, in some cases, automation of entire jobs. But there is also, there is a need then to make sure that people have the opportunity to get upskilled and to sort of have their job descriptions evolve along with the technology that is provided.
In terms of the people that I'm looking to align for education in this space, it seems to be that everyone is still learning and trying to learn from each other.
Yeah.
What have you been learning as of recent on the topic of AI? Maybe some of the misconceptions, perhaps.
A lot of people get the information about AI from, as I mentioned, for example, Hollywood or places where it's sort of very far in one direction that is not necessarily reality. The parts of the aspects of it may be, like some of the underlying technology of what they can do, but...
Science fiction versus reality, the sci-fi approach. Take me out 50 years, 100 years. Where do you see it going?
One wise man once said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And going that far out in the future on AI seems daunting, especially if you look at what has happened just over this past year. So looking a little closer, I do see modern versions of AI, generative AI, large language models, having significant impact throughout society, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives. How people are using the technology to become more efficient in their jobs, but also how this can enable new scenarios that are simply impossible without AI. I think AI is sort of poised to generate a lot of new wealth across society, across the industry, in terms of process efficiency. But through that, it also obviously has the risk of sort of deepening existing inequities. So I think there has to be a lot of focus on equitable outcomes of AI, making sure that the benefits of these technologies reach a broader set of users, both in terms of those that interact with it, and so things like no-code interfaces can really help accelerate that, but also those that are impacted by AI-based solutions, which may be people who are not even sort of touching the AI system, but are on the receiving outcome of an AI process. For example, if you talk about predicting food scarcity, then you want to make sure that that is done, that is built ethically, that you have reliable data to learn from, so that you sort of know where to focus investments.
So there seems to be a significant amount of use case here. Beyond the please edit my email, please fix or please write a draft letter, that there's a lot more to it. I'm noticing now that you can upload documents, and it can not just rewrite the document, it can summarize it. It can make it easy for a fifth grader to understand.
Yeah, so a lot of the use cases that I see with the nonprofits and humanitarian organizations I'm working with is around sort of putting the data that they care about in front of these models. So these models, or large language models, are very, very capable, trained on an insane amount of data. they know, have access to, as part of the training process, data from the digital world around us. But they often don't have access to the specific data that these organizations care about. So the process of taking their data they care about and put that in front of the models means that you can then start to ask questions about the data, use some of the generative and sort of deep insight capabilities from the model to understand what's in their data. And so that can be, for example, annual reports from in-country programs, or it can be insights related to sort of trends over time. And so you can start to ask questions like, based on what we know so far, from the recent programs, which programs or which specific processes or methodologies seem to be successful, and what would you recommend we look at for tweaks to programs so we can make better decisions in the future? And so a lot of that is down to experimentation, sort of really trying to understand how to get the most out of these models. And so that's sort of essentially what I spend most of my days with, talking with these organizations to understand their challenges, their use cases, and then sort of brainstorm on how can AI help here? Generative AI specifically, how can we make use of that for your specific challenges, your specific use cases, and how can that help you sort of scale up your mission?
Now, are you finding they're trusting with this information? Are they more likely to apply it, or are you still seeing pushback?
Oh, there's definitely pushback, and that is a key obstacle to adopting some of these technologies, and understandably so. With big changes, and these generative AI models have really introduced big changes, it's only natural to see doubts, concerns, and so I sort of try to proactively talk about exactly how the AI capability works, how it makes mistakes, how it makes decisions, and sort of tease out the sort of Hollywood-style information from reality, so really make sure that people understand, once you integrate this into your ecosystem or you build it as a solution, what are ways that that this can help you? And obviously there's some focus on what is done with the data, where the data is stored, how it's protected, making sure that it doesn't get leaked out, making sure that the models are using data interactions. Because something we have heard about as issues that you want to make sure that you completely control the data, that the data is not used to improve the models. And so, yeah.
Robotics. Mm-hmm. What do you see? You think we're going to have these household robots that are going to be helping us with all aspects of our life and having AI embedded inside of them?
Mm.
What do you see?
Yeah, so I see, robotics is sort of let's say, a pure field. And often you see AI exposed physically, visually in a robot. More often, the AI is sort of hiding under the hood. There's no sort of physical object necessarily to it, or it's integrated into objects you already have, like a phone, for example. But yeah, I think there's a lot of trends in robotics, and obviously, as AI capabilities get more mature, the robotics capabilities that leverage AI also follows along.
So the AI itself today, it's connected to a centralized server or servers.
Okay.
So it's more me asking it. So it's being housed there. Who holds that data?
I'd say there are two aspects to the data itself. So there's the data sets used for train the background model, the large language model, that is sort of using data, publicly available data from the world at large, in the digital world. And so we at Microsoft have a close partnership with OpenAI. They train the models on our cloud service, on Azure, and we use the models in many of our services. And then so that's sort of the background data that happens ahead of time. And then once you actually use those models for something that's relevant to you or to your organization, then pointing that to data you care about, that's sort of where it sort of really connects in terms of what you can use the capabilities for. So there's data to train, and then there is data to ask questions about and get information about. So those are sort of two separate pieces.
Where did you go to learn all of this, though, Michael? I mean, now you are the head of artificial intelligence in the Microsoft philanthropy division, goodwill division. But who taught you? I mean, 20 years, you didn't have a guide. It's not like there was a book to all of this. There were ideas and opinions and people that we thought were once crazy, and these are mad scientists. Or who trained you?
Yeah, so obviously it continues learning, and as we go forward, there's going to be a whole lot of more continuous learning and continued skilling. But I started out with just a passion for languages and linguistics, and was able to, fortunate enough to connect professionally that to a profession initially with language technology. I had no idea what it was at the time, but it sounded very interesting, and that has ended up being sort of really a core pillar of modern AI. And I'm a linguist at heart, so I'm really excited to see how language as an interface is getting a lot of traction, a lot of attention now. It is, I think, language as an interface to the digital world can really be an equalizing factor. It can help people access services, capabilities, benefits, data, insights much more easily than other mechanisms. It's very natural, intuitive. You talk and you get answers back.
So I got to ask you the question about languages, because I think we just take it, we're around it, so we never really think about how did it begin? How did all these languages, English language, how did it all originate? Where did it originate? What's the process of the evolution of it?
Man, that's a
I know.
deep question.
Loaded question
Yeah.
for you, Michael.
Yeah, clearly outside of my sort of direct area expertise, but obviously we need to communicate. As humans, we need to communicate with each other. We function as a community and a society because we're able to communicate with each other. We see when communication breaks down, we see that some of our core connections across society start to break down. So language really is at the core of what we are as humans and how we operate and interact with each other. And so using language as an interface and using the technology around language means that you can continue with this sort of very intuitive medium to access information and access technology outcomes.
And is artificial intelligence helping to keep languages that are long forgotten alive?
A couple of points there. So AI has evolved significantly, and talking about human parity is one metric. It's just one metric. It's used in academic benchmarking. It's very useful, but it's just one measure, one metric, and it's important to mention that human recognition, human understanding is not at 100%, just as the corresponding AI capabilities will not be 100%.
So when you think about using AI to solve deep, complex problems,
I think it's a really powerful tool. I think when you think about how these very large models have learned from a lot of data, are able to gain a lot of insight, you can start to ask it really complex questions. It is important to keep in mind, though, that it's just repeating things it's seen before. It's repeating things in context. So it's understanding what you said, and that's matching to something it has seen before in the training data, and it's replying back with something that aligns with that context. So it doesn't understand, it doesn't know, it doesn't have sort of pure cognition or cognitive capabilities, although that's sort of what we talk about, because that's the type of vocabulary that helps get a sense of what it is it does and sort of how it works. But if you use it as a tool and you know how to ask the right questions, it can be really powerful for brainstorming and also for insights. So if the answer is in the data there somewhere, and you know how to ask the questions, you can get insights that would be really hard to get by, maybe even impossible to get by. In terms of, say, new scientific discoveries, it's possible that these types of models can help direct the person interacting with it towards that, but it doesn't do it by itself. And so it's a powerful tool. We often talk about a co-pilot, which I think is a well-chosen term, that you are in control, you, the person who is interacting with this capability, but you have a really, really powerful assistant, really powerful co-pilot that has access to all the world's digital data, and not all the digital data, but a lot of the digital data, and is able to look through all of that, which would be impossible for any one person to look through, and make connections that are really hard to see through these really, really powerful processing capabilities. And so through that, if you're able to ask the right questions and you sort of do follow-up questions, it's really having a conversation with the models, then that can definitely help you get to insights that would be very hard to get or impossible to get without it.
So that's the current model or models. What are the ones you've heard that are being worked on? The ones that are the self-driving cars.
Right, right. One example, as we were talking about languages, we have a project now with a nonprofit I'm working with called Education Development Center on finding ways how we can use AI to automatically assess spoken language. So spoken language assessment of a language. And we're doing this, we've done this in a previous project for a sort of large, well-documented, well-resourced language. In that case, it was Spanish, so lots of data to work on there. But we're doing it now also in local communities on helping to preserve and revitalize endangered languages. So there are a lot of communities where young speakers today, they're unable to have conversations in the local language with, say, their grandparents. So there are a lot of languages that are dying out. And so having a solution or an experience where they can start to sort of really engage with their language and get automatic assessments through that. So that's one way that AI can help with that. And I think because they're so mature now, because these models are so mature now and so advanced, I honestly think that the biggest obstacle to what we can get from AI is imagination. It's around understanding what the models can do, understand how it makes decisions, how it makes mistakes, trying to connect from that knowledge, trying to connect the capabilities to new scenarios. This can really enable capabilities that are impossible without AI. That are simply just not feasible given the amount of data you have to look. So an example of that is where we use satellite images to train a model that looks at images from a region from before a natural disaster as well as from after. And then we look at the differences between the two and have manual labeled of those images so you can identify segments within those images of buildings that have been damaged. And you can get the level of damage as well. You can train a model with enough examples, and then you can start to learn what a damaged building looks like. And you can apply that model to different regions. So we've done that, trained on earthquake disaster, and then apply the same model to, say, hurricanes. And that model can now, we're also using in Ukraine to look at from before and after the conflict, and so that the UN has a sense of what it's going to cost to rebuild a country based on the level of damage to individual buildings.
You know, it's interesting, you kind of triggered some things with me to think of the human upgrade. You know, upgrading our current version by using tools and technologies like this. I travel extensively, as do you, Dr. Michael. And I always wonder why there couldn't just be some chip in my head or in my ear that can translate them to me to them to make it easy. And you're telling me that if AI can do the translation, then why aren't we there to be able to do that?
You're still missing the human component. You can certainly automate steps in the process. You can transcribe what you're saying. You can translate it to a different language. You can even ask it to convert it to, say, a different tone of voice. Different audience, you change what you want it to sound like. But it's still missing your critical thinking. And if you go back to some of the responsible AI design principles, having a human in the loop is absolutely critical, let's say for critical processes. There are certainly things where you can just sort of execute it and take the outcome and go with it.
But could you remove? Is there an ability to remove the human element, the human component?
Well, so that's what we're seeing with some of the tasks that how that's play or how does that have an impact on the job market, right? So some tasks can be automated through AI or other types of automation, and that is removing the human component of that. But you still need that human validation of the generated content at the end. A lot of the interactions with the GPT models have been around generating new content, right? And so that is great for just sort of brainstorming and many other types of things like summarizing documents or things like that. But if you want to use that content for something important downstream, you can certainly generate the content, but you do need a human to validate the quality, the appropriateness, make sure that what is generated there is something that fits with the purpose you want to use it for. Like, say, if you want to generate an email, you can certainly do that, but you probably shouldn't just send it off before taking a look at it. Make sure that it reflects your values, your tone of voice, etc.
It seems to be that we have this misconception then that AI is self-learning and it's on its own. And yes, from time to time we can ask it questions, but it can do its own without us.
AI can be self-learning. Machine learning is sort of the primary methodology within AI. And yes, it keeps learning based on data that it sees, or it can do that. But there are still limitations to what it can do. One of the things that has been interesting about the large language models and the generative AI capabilities is, as part of training those models, it was told to do certain specific things, such as translating languages, such as math or other areas. But just from looking at data all around, it had learned other things as well. And so you can give it specific instructions, focus on that, but it can certainly also learn other things as part of looking at data. And so that's where, when you ask questions about the data using that model, that's where you can get some really interesting insights in terms of sort of connecting the dots between an important point here that you may not see and something over here. And so being able to ask the right questions to connect that, that's a bit of the art of the possible there.
So what I'm hearing is that this idea of Hollywood of the Matrix, of eventually this becoming that, is, from your opinion, not reality.
I don't. If you think about Skynet, for example, in the Terminator movies, it's down to the humans building the AI models, deploying the AI models, and using the AI models. So as an example, in education, we've been working on an AI-assisted learning capability where you have sort of an assistant tool that can help you prepare for tests, for example. And so you can ask questions about content you have just sort of gone through to make sure you understand that content. So automatically generate questions and automatically assess your answers. And I think knowing about how people learn, we all learn in different ways. There are methodologies that are optimized for some people, not for others. So being able to choose the mode of interaction, whether that is speech as an interface, it is text, it's images, or something else, the AI enables significantly more personalization to the learning experience that can help learning outcomes, can help with retention, and help with motivation and engagement. So I think across many, many different sectors and disciplines and fields, I think just raising awareness of what AI can do and how it can apply to your specific challenges, I think that is really going to spur a lot of innovation and a lot of new creative sort of solutions built upon AI.
Dr. Michael, thank you for sharing your story on Free Your Voice.